So I think you've heard from John's description of the annual meeting and CESMII 1.0, how important and fundamental technology interoperability is to achieving smart manufacturing adoption, broad smart manufacturing adoption with manufacturers and technology providers. It's so important that most of our projects and collaborations and the Executive Council talk about how we solve this problem of technology interoperability. And through CESMII 1.0, we investigated and proved out a lot of the technology concepts using a reference architecture and implementing technologies, bringing them together. But we noticed a pretty big gap in our technology needs as an industry, which is a lack of a standard API for the interoperability that's necessary between those manufacturing technology platforms, data aggregators, and the applications that are actually driving value for the manufacturers themselves. Part of why we've seen a lack of standards in this space is a difference in evolution of technology from the IT space and the OT space. So on the left-hand side of this graphic, you see that IT technology has evolved in such a way where devices now are plug and play, right? But once upon a time, they were not so easy to use with your computer. If you wanted to plug in your printer, your mouse, or your keyboard via USB, it required it to be installed as a quote-unquote project. But over time and 40 years of standards definition and adoption, now when you can plug anything into your USB port and you no longer have to manually install it, it's got drivers and standards that allow it to be easily detectable by your computer, and you get to then have faster time to value from actually using the devices that connect to your computer. However, in the OT space, we haven't seen the same sort of adoption of standards-based technologies. Every OT data source is its own project. You have to manually extract the data from each of those data sources, and that means tag mapping or mapping digital I/O and analog I/O into the project that's actually going to drive value. But what we need to see is something more like the IT space so that we can more quickly scale our OT infrastructure and architectures, be able to connect more things together, and be able to have faster time to value from the data generated from these operations, which is really what smart manufacturing is about. That's why we want broader adoption of smart manufacturing within this industry and within the United States. So if we can get to this point, we're going to have better competition, accelerated innovation. But first, we got to get past this point of lack of standards-based interoperability within the OT space. And this will help solve a lot of the problems that manufacturers face, like vendor lock-in, inability to share data across manufacturing. John spoke to this at length about how there's an increased need and interest to share data, but if we don't have technology interoperability, we're not going to be able to make that happen. So again, part of what CESMII 1.0 has been focused on is investigating the space. How do we facilitate technology interoperability and accelerate the ability of the application developers to create that value from data? And it starts at one of the most basic levels, which is standard information models. If you've talked to me before, you've heard me and Jonathan talk about how important it is to have contextualized data as the fundamental layer of technology interoperability. From there, you get the benefits of object-oriented and type-safe development. And then that enables you to describe the complexity of the graphical relationships that exist between your data. With that in place, an API can then leverage the object-oriented nature and interconnectedness of your data to drive value. But there needs to be a standard API that allows you to actually read that data out from your machines and your platforms. So smart manufacturing and interoperability platforms need to have these basic requirements in place in order to have full interoperability with other systems, other applications. You need to ingest those SM profiles from the SM Marketplace, which is the location where we have the crowdsourced SM profiles. The platform needs to persist instances of those SM profiles and the relationships that exist between those the instances of those profiles. For example, a machine may have a different operator during different periods of time, and it also will have a relationship with the product that's being produced in a given batch. The open source API that is necessary to connect the data aggregators and applications needs to be part of those platforms. And the platform needs to be able to handle all types of relationships, hierarchical and non-hierarchical relationships. By supporting multiple open and standard data sources, you're future-proofing the platform, and the manufacturers are future-proofing their architectures. I'm sure you've seen this slide before, but I want to draw your attention to the application layer, which is the part that we're focusing on with this working group. It started as a request for comment, which we published, and we continue to invite feedback from industry on the definition of this standard API. It's an industrial information interoperability exchange API that consumes data from the SM core. It consumes the contextualized data and makes it available for applications. And an application can be a web-based application, a machine learning algorithm. It can be other platforms, other systems, but make it available for reading and writing. It defines the basic primitives for reading and writing and discovering what exists on the platform. We are really excited about what we're doing with this working group. It's following the W3C best practices, which is a standards organization pushing for other standards in the World Wide Web space, and as an API that is driven by web technologies, it was important to follow standards for the formation and definition of how we are going to operate as a working group. And our objectives are to create a first of its kind common API that defines the basic primitives that any platform adopter can implement, and then allow interoperability between the different applications that are going to be the value added, the things that add value to the manufacturing operation. It's a huge step forward to interoperability. Nothing like this really exists. And we are really excited to see adoption and participation from manufacturing, software platform providers, and application developers. This is a joint effort. This isn't just CESMII doing it. This is CESMII and CESMII members and discussing what needs to be in this API, what the specification needs to entail, and inviting feedback from all of you and the broader industry on what is required from this API for it to be useful and adopted broadly by the industry. We have put together a timeline. So we kicked this off in November and have been meeting. We meet every other week to discuss feedback that we're getting from the industry, to discuss the design of the actual API primitives, and eventually have a draft of the specification document, including reference implementations, so that we have a good example for adoption from both technology providers and application developers. So if you are interested in getting involved, if you have questions, if you want to see the actual API development, you can see it at our GitHub page. It has the request for comment, which is a common way of soliciting feedback for standards adoptions. And read our charter, read the proposed API documentation. And if you have feedback or would like to get involved, reach out to myself, Jonathan, or the DevOps team. There's also a way to submit issues if you have comments that you would like publicly available for discussion for future joint working groups meetings. So thank you.
Outstanding. Thank you, Olivia. So I stated before, this is an important body of work. We've officially launched this at the member meeting in November. We have been working with hundreds of different input providers so far and from around the world. This is truly an open initiative, as Olivia mentioned, and I would welcome your input. If anyone here on the call today, or if you know of others who are interested and might be open to contributing their requirements, their feedback to this process, to this request for comments for this API, please engage, and we welcome all of that. This is how how we reach a great outcome, which is an industry standard for how manufacturing systems platforms can be architected and how manufacturing application developers can work against a common open specification for the first time ever. So